Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Jasmine Starry and I share scary stories from Reddit. Today's story is titled Death Predictions in a Nursing Home. I've heard plenty of stories of people who have predicted their own death. Now it's my turn to share some death predictions I have heard that come true. I work as a lead social worker in a nursing home. Now there's nothing inherently scary about working in a nursing home, or just nursing homes in general, other than the occasional horrendous smell that will knock your socks off. But in the time I've been working at this as a head social worker at my nursing facility, I've had 2 residents predict their own death. One of them isn't terribly creepy, mainly just sad. The other one gives me the creeps. We'll start with the one that's not terribly creepy. This particular resident had been there for a bit and were there for long-term care. They were fairly young, below the age of 60. They were there because the medical issues made it difficult for them to live independently. I started being their social worker during COVID-19 pandemic. And at the time of this incident, it was around December 2020, getting close to Christmas. The resident was in fairly stable condition, no major health problems that were going to cause imminent death. By all means, they would have lived a lot longer had it not been the circumstances around their death. One day, I was chatting with a resident when they asked if I could go home to visit family for the holidays. With the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, it was policy that residents could not go on outings for the potentially they would come back and cause an outbreak. So I sadly had to tell the resident no, they could not go home for the holidays. The resident began to sob. I did my best to comfort them. I enlisted the help of the director of nursing to try to settle them down. As we were talking to the sobbing resident, the resident confided that they were utterly sure they were not going to live to see the next Christmas. We did our best to reassure the resident that they were in stable condition, that there was nothing wrong that would cause them to die within the next year. But unfortunately, due to not a lot of sudden and conflicting factors, the resident passed away 2 weeks later. Now the second story. The resident was probably somewhere in their 60s. The resident had numerous health issues, but since we were providing nursing care and rehabilitation, it was assumed that they would get to go home with their spouse. One day while chatting with a nurse on the residence hall, I heard the resident cry out. I walked over to their room, and they were in a fetal position on their bed with an utter look of terror and dread on their face. I immediately asked what was wrong, if I needed to fetch their nurse. The resident looked at me and said there were people just outside the door talking about how the resident was going to die soon and how they were going to dig the resident's grave. I attempted to reassure the resident that no one was talking about the resident dying. There was no one there talking about digging the resident's grave. I had just been fairly close to their room, and the conversation between the nurse and I had nothing to do with the resident, let alone dying and digging their grave. The resident seemed to calm down a bit, and things proceeded as normal, but just days later, the resident was transferred to the hospital where they died shortly after. It still haunts me what entities were outside the resident's door discussing the resident's death days before it occurred.